What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about the Paramount Pictures action blockbuster film, Top Gun: Maverick, and how the filmmakers achieved historic box office success by essentially making a virtual Xerox copy of the original film. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't managed to see this movie yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time, let's get into it. Top Gun: Maverick is an American action drama film directed by Joseph Kosinski and written by Aaron Kruger, Eric Warren Singer, and Christopher McQuarrie from stories by Peter Craig and Justin Marks. The film is a sequel to the 1986 film Top Gun, with Tom Cruise reprising his starring role as the rebellious naval aviator Pete Maverick Mitchell. It is based on the characters of the original film created by Jim Cash and also stars Miles Teller, Jennifer Connelly, John Hamm, Glenn Powell, Lewis Pullman, Ed Harris, and Val Kilmer, who reprises his role as Iceman. The story involves Maverick confronting his past while training a group of younger Top Gun graduates, including the son of his deceased best friend, Goose, for a dangerous mission. Now, development of a Top Gun sequel was announced way back in 2010 by Paramount Pictures. Tom Cruise, along with producer Jerry Bruckheimer and director Tony Scott, were all asked to return. Craig wrote a draft of the screenplay in 2012, but the project stalled when Scott died later that year. Production resumed in 2017 after Kosinski was brought on to direct. Principal photography for the film took place from May of 2018 to April 2019 in California, Washington, and Maryland. And the film was initially scheduled to be released on July 12th of 2019, but it was delayed several times due to its complex action sequences and later the COVID-19 pandemic. During the pandemic, several streaming companies attempted to purchase the streaming rights to the film from Paramount, but all offers were declined on the orders of Cruise, who insisted that it be released exclusively in theaters. Now, Top Gun: Maverick finally did premiere at CinemaCon on April 28th of 2022 and was theatrically released by Paramount Pictures in the United States on May 27th. The film was acclaimed by critics, with many calling it better than the original. It won Best Film from the National Board of Review and was also named the top 10 films of 2022 by the American Film Institute. Top Gun: Maverick was nominated for 6 awards at the 95th Academy Awards, including Best Picture, winning Best Sound, and received numerous other accolades. The film managed to gross almost $1.5 billion worldwide, making it the second highest grossing film of 2022 and the highest grossing film of Tom Cruise's career. Now, at the time of the making of this video, the movie has a pristine 96% on Rotten Tomatoes, and that's based on approximately 476 critic reviews, with an equally impressive audience score of 99%. And that's based on over 50,000 verified ratings. Now, it has a rather puzzling Metascore of only 78 on Metacritic, but that's based on only 63 critic reviews. Now, I don't know what's going on there. And I didn't see an audience score at all, which I did think was strange, but, so be it. And finally, it has an 8.3 out of 10 on IMDb, and that's based on over 650,000 reviews. So, let me say, before I get too deep in the weeds on this particular video, that Top Gun: Maverick was absolutely the best action movie of 2022, hands down. Hell, it might be the best action film of the last 10 years. Now, having said that, in this video, I'm going to walk you through how the filmmakers essentially copied the beat sheet from the original film and pumped out not only a visual masterpiece, but a narrative one as well. So let's start here. What exactly is a story beat? A story beat is the smallest unit of story within the structural narrative, Now, the beats are what essentially make up the story. So what I'm going to do here is match the story beats from Top Gun with the beats of Top Gun: Maverick and show you just how similar, or in some cases, how identical they actually are. And, we're going to be using Blake Snyder's beat sheet in order to facilitate this conversation, just so we can all be on the same page as I go through this. And now that we've decided that, here we go. So we'll start with the opening image, that being the first thing that we as the audience see as the movie gets started. Now, in this case, the opening image is the same in both films. Well, virtually the same. It's fighter planes taking off from an aircraft carrier as the Top Gun theme plays in the background, going straight into Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone. Now, in the case of the original film, Top Gun, the opening image was great. It started the film off with a nice shot of anticipation and energy. Now, in Top Gun Maverick, I was a little less impressed by its inclusion, one, because we had seen it before in the original film, and two, because it really didn't have anything to do with the film that we were about to watch. I think in Top Gun Maverick, they simply included the sequence for nostalgia's sake, and it was one of the very few screenwriting issues I had with Top Gun Maverick. Now, as for the setup, Maverick is participating in some sort of training exercise over the Indian Ocean in the original film, with Goose flying in tandem with Cougar and Merlin, when they encounter a couple of MiG-28s. Now, they are unaware if the MiGs pose a credible threat or not, but the bogey's presence seemed to freak Cougar out to the point where he's having trouble landing his plane on the aircraft carrier nearby. Maverick is ordered to land by Commander Jardian, call sign Stinger, but he refuses to do so and instead decides to go back up and help Cougar get back to the carrier safely. Now, upon finally landing on the carrier, Cougar arrives in Commander Jardian's office and tells him that he's done flying. Commander Jardian tries to convince Cougar to stay, but he insists that because of his wife and kid back home, he needs to take a step back. Maverick and Goose are waiting in the hall and are summoned into Stinger's office as Cougar leaves, and they are berated for Maverick's refusal to follow orders. Now, in the case of Top Gun Maverick, we have Maverick in a hangar out in the desert working on an old P-51, shout out to the Red Tails. He grabs his jacket, his keys, and his shades before hopping on his bike and riding to a testing facility where we find out that he is participating as a test pilot flying the SR-72 Dark Star and trying to get the aircraft to reach a speed of Mach 10. Now, upon arriving, Maverick is told that Rear Admiral Kane has ordered them to stand down pending his arrival and that he plans to shut down their program in favor of his drone program. Now, Maverick decides, to go ahead with the launch and to try to reach Mach 10 a whole month early in the hopes of saving the program. Maverick takes off just as Rear Admiral Kane arrives at the testing facility, and while he's in the air, he does in fact achieve Mach 10, but when he can't resist the urge to press the issue, the plane explodes. Now, after that, we see Maverick walk into a diner, still in his flight suit, where he asks the waitress for a glass of water, and then he asks where he is. We then see him being dropped off back at the testing facility, where he is then met by military police. Now, from there, in both films, we see the outcome of Maverick directly defying orders from a superior, which is him getting into deep trouble for it. It's the same situation in both films from a macro sense. It's just updated in the second film to make sense of the 36-year gap between the two movies. Now, the catalyst in both films is Maverick being called to Top Gun, an elite school for the top 1% of pilots in the United States Navy, located in Miramar, California, in lieu of facing a court-martial. The only real difference between the two instances is, in the first film, he goes to Top Gun with Goose, and in the second, he goes alone. Now, when it comes to the debate in the first film, it's Maverick and Goose in a class being taught by Jester, with Iceman, Slider, and the other Top Gun students. Now, from there, we see Maverick and Goose in a military bar wearing their dress uniforms. That's when Charlotte, aka Charlie, shows up, and we get the cover of She's Lost That Loving Feeling, the original song by the Righteous Brothers. Now, Maverick uses the song to create an opportunity to try to hit on Charlie, ultimately following her into a bathroom and convincing her to tell Goose that the two of them had sex in there. Now, in the sequel film, this section involves Maverick reporting to Cyclone and Warlock and receiving information on a teaching assignment wherein he'll be expected to prepare a group of Top Gun graduates for a dangerous mission, which is a bit of a deviation from the original film. But then we get Maverick in a military bar where he meets Penny Benjamin, who, if you remember, we didn't see in the original film, though she was mentioned. And though Maverick doesn't sing in the new film, Rooster, Goose's son, eventually arrives at the bar, and that's when we get the Great Balls of Fire cover as Maverick is playfully being escorted out of the bar by Hangman, Payback, and Coyote for not being able to cover his tab. Now, the break into two in the first film is Maverick sitting in class in a hangar, being embarrassed to find out that Charlie is actually a civilian contractor who will be working directly with and evaluating the Top Gun pilots. Now, in the sequel, it's Hangman, Payback, and Coyote sitting in a class in the hangar, being embarrassed to find out that Maverick will be their instructor and will ultimately be responsible for choosing the team that goes on the mission. So, as you can see, same exact story beat, it's just flipped, whereas Maverick is concerned. Now, the B story, or Fun and Games as it's also called, is where all the flying around starts. It's where we get to see all the cool stuff that the fighter planes can do. In the first film, we get Maverick and Goose on their first hop, chasing Jester below the hard deck, earning a kill but breaking the rule of engagement in the process, disqualifying themselves from the day's competition. Maverick then does a flyby on a nearby tower on the way back to the base, and after that, Maverick has a third confrontation with Iceman in the locker room about who the better pilot is, before being called to the carpet by Viper for both cheating in the competition and buzzing the tower. Now, from there, Goose talks to Maverick about taking Top Gun seriously. The next day, Maverick is chastised by Charlie about being overly aggressive before she secretly invites him to her house for dinner. And then next, we get the infamous volleyball game to the sound of Playing with the Boys, another Kenny Loggins joint. Maverick leaves the game early to go meet Charlie, and the pair have dinner, while Charlie asks Maverick about the MiG over and over and over again, prompting him ultimately to tell her, hey, relax about the MiG. Now, later that afternoon, Maverick does tell Charlie a bit more about his dad before she secretly agrees to date him. The next day, the pair meet in an elevator on the base, and Charlie makes it a point to remind Maverick that even though the pair are now a couple, that she will still have to do her job. And next, we see Goose's family show up for a visit. Then we see Charlie chastise Maverick again in class, this time publicly, about his dogfighting tactics, which seem to anger him. Now, in the sequel, instead of seeing Maverick and Goose navigate simulated dogfighting against their instructors, we see Maverick challenging the younger graduates, making them do push-ups after each kill. Now, he gets into it with Rooster during the exercise, and the pair challenge each other, flying below the hard deck, again, before Maverick ultimately fake shoots him down. Now, this gets Maverick in trouble with Cyclone, who instructs him to never do such a thing again. From there, Maverick stops by the bar to pay Penny what he owes before helping her sail her boat to the boatyard to be repaired. He then begins teaching the Top Gun graduates the plan for the mission, and we watch them try to execute it with no success. Now, during a class, Hangman reveals that Maverick flew with Rooster's father, which provokes a fight between the pair that Maverick ultimately has to break up. And after that, Maverick is called to Iceman's house, where he finds out that his cancer has returned. Now, Maverick, fearing that the mission will cost some of the pilots he's training their lives, doesn't want to send Rooster because he doesn't think he's ready. Now, Iceman tells Maverick that it's his job to get him ready, as well as the other pilots. And then next, because of the toxic competition and infighting amongst the pilots, Maverick organizes a dogfight football game for the group, to Cyclone's dismay. But the game seems to bring the group together. So, as you can see in these sections, it goes all the way to the point of a sporting event of some kind of using as a bonding exercise, for, members of the group who are kind of, being overly dramatically competitive, right? They got to learn that they're on the same side. So the midpoint in the first film is Maverick being chased down in traffic by Charlie, after embarrassing him in class, where she admits to being in love with him, followed by the pair, having adult time to take my breath away. I'm sure if you saw the first movie, you remember that scene. Now, in the sequel, the midpoint is Maverick taking Penny home on his bike, and then the pair sharing a slightly less romantic encounter which I thought was appropriate given their ages and kind of everything that was going on in the sequel film. And at this point, I had to say, I thought the exterior of Penny's house looked a lot like the exterior of Charlie's house between the two films, but I've done some research and it appears that it isn't the same house, though, because the film does lean extremely heavily on nostalgia. I'm sure that Penny's house was chosen to create that feeling that it might be the same house as Charlie's house. So, in the bad guys section, which is the section that comes next in this whole endeavor, Maverick and Goose find out that Iceman won another round, but that they're only 2 points behind. So on hop 19, the halfway mark of their training, Maverick and Goose find out that Viper is in one of the bogey planes. So during the exercise, Maverick leaves Hollywood, his wingman, in order to chase down Viper, allowing Jester to fake shoot his plane down from behind, resulting in the pair receiving no points for the day. Later, Jester praises his flying, but reminds him to never, ever leave his wingman. Maverick, upset with himself, apologizes to Goose for the mistake. And then later we see Maverick and Goose in a bar with Charlie and Goose's family, including the young boy who would become Rooster when he grows up. And this is where we get the infamous original Great Balls of Fire cover, the original song by Jerry Lee Lewis. And during this scene, we get a conversation between Carol, Goose's wife, and Maverick, where Carol mentions that Maverick was once in love with a Penny Benjamin. Maverick then goes and joins Goose in song while Carol tells Charlie that Maverick is, and I quote, 100% prime time in love with you. She then tells Goose to take her to bed or lose her forever, to which Goose replies, "Show me the way home, honey." Now, from there, the group sings the song together, and then we see Maverick riding his bike along the water with Charlie on the back. Now, they stop to make out, and Charlie then repeats Carol's demand to her husband, to Maverick, telling him to, and I quote, "take her to bed or lose her forever." Now, in the sequel, the bad guys section is the detachment getting the update that the mission will have to be executed sooner than expected, with the pilots still yet to complete their practice run successfully. Now, they continue the training, but during the exercise, Coyote blacks out and his plane, now unmanned, goes into a dive. Now, he waits just in time to avoid crashing into the base of a mountain, but soon after, a bird strike causes Phoenix and Bob's plane to crash, though both were able to eject before the plane is destroyed, which just kind of shows you that the writers flipped the outcome of the same beat from the first movie. You know what I mean? This time, it's not Maverick and Goose's plane that goes down because of an air flat spin. This time, it's Phoenix and Bob's plane that goes down due to a bird strike. And this time, in the process of ejecting, everybody is able to eject from the plane safely. Now, the all is lost section in the original film is when Maverick and Goose go up for another dogfighting exercise. With their scores tied, Maverick and Iceman gently rib each other before engaging the bogey aircraft. Now, Iceman cuts Maverick off during the exercise in the hopes of getting to the point before Maverick does, but he can't seem to get a good angle for the shot. Maverick calls Iceman off, and Iceman agrees to be called off, but as he moves out of the way, Maverick's plane gets caught in his jet wash, sending the plane into an uncontrolled flat spin, headed out to sea. Maverick and Goose are finally able to eject, but when they do, Goose's head strikes the canopy and he breaks his neck. The pilots land in the ocean and are ultimately rescued by the Coast Guard, but Goose is dead. Now, in the sequel, the All Is Lost section is Maverick and Rooster talking about the dangers of their chosen profession. Rooster finally asks Maverick why he pulled his papers. An argument ensues. Rooster tells Maverick that his dad believed in him and that he would not make the same mistake. Just then, Warlock arrives to give Maverick the news that Iceman has died. The pilots all attend Iceman's funeral. Soon after, Cyclone relieves Maverick of his duties as the pilot's instructor and tells Maverick that he should prepare for retirement. So as you can see, in this case, in both films, someone dies, right? And in the original film, it's Goose, and in the sequel, it's Iceman. But again, like I said, what you're seeing is, the writers kind of lean very heavily on recreating these beats or finding a way to recreate these beats. And they're doing it so close together that it's basically just, like I said, a carbon copy of the original film. Now, The Dark Night of the Soul in the original film is Maverick reeling from the death of his backseat and best friend. Viper visits Maverick in the emergency hospital on the base, and he says to him, if you fly long enough, things like this happen. Maverick, of course, blames himself. Viper tells Maverick that he has to stop blaming himself and he has to let Goose go. Now, Charlie also spends time with Maverick and tries to help him through the situation. Maverick packs up Goose's things and takes them to Carol, who's still in town. And Carol tells Maverick that Goose loved flying with him, but that he would have flown anyway without him. She says that he would have hated it, but he would have done it. And it essentially encouraging Maverick that, also that he has to move on. So everybody's telling Maverick, you have to find a way to move forward. And so Maverick eventually stands before a board of inquiry and is found not to be at fault for the accident, and they restore his flight status. Viper tells Jester then to get Maverick flying again soon. On the next hop, Maverick is timid on the stick. Jester and his new backseat Sundown both try to get him to engage, but he can't. Now back on the base, Maverick and Sundown get into a confrontation about his lack of aggression. And, Viper and Jester see the incident. That's the part where he goes, I will fire when I am goddamn good and ready. You got that? Viper tells Jester, keep sending him up until he finds his way through it. And then we get the scene in the locker room, and we see Maverick, packing up a bag, and Iceman telling him that he's sorry about Goose. And, Maverick kind of accepts his words, and Maverick closes his locker and walks out of the locker room. And that's where I believe it's Wolfman who makes the phone call and says, yeah, Maverick just quit Top Gun. So next, Charlie finds Maverick at the bar and tells him that she heard what happened. She also tells him that she got the promotion that she was looking for, so she'll be leaving soon. She goes on to tell him that the accident wasn't his fault and he has to move on. She tells Maverick that she's there to help him. Of course, Maverick tells her that he doesn't want his help, so ultimately Charlie leaves. Next, we see Maverick at Viper's house, and Viper tells Maverick that he flew with his old man and that he's a lot like him. He tells Maverick that his father flew well. He tells him some classified information about his father's death. Maverick then asks Viper what his options are, and Viper tells him he has enough points to graduate with his Top Gun class, but he can also quit. Now, Maverick goes for a ride on his bike, and he thinks it over. Now, in the sequel film, Maverick and Penny talk about his firing. And Penny asks Maverick what he plans to do. Maverick claims he doesn't know. But Penny tells Maverick not to give up. She goes, hey, those are your pilots. And if anything happens to them, you'll never forgive yourself, so you have to find a way. Meanwhile, Cyclone has taken over the pilot's training. And he changes the strategy, making the mission that much more life-threatening. And the pilots all know it. They've been trained for a while to fly this mission a certain way because it's the only way you fly it and you come back alive. And so now that Cyclone is changing the mission, they all kind of understand, okay, yeah, Cyclone really doesn't give a crap if we come back from this or not. Like he accepts that as collateral damage, And so as he's instructing the pilots about this new strategy, Maverick has decided to commandeer a plane and go for a practice run on the course to prove that the mission can be flown his way. Now, in the break into 3 in the original film, we see that Maverick has chosen to graduate with his Top Gun class, though he does show up a little late. And we see that Iceman has won the Top Gun trophy. Now, in the sequel, Cyclone chastises Maverick for again failing to follow orders, reminding him that Iceman is no longer there to protect him and that he should have him court-martialed. But he decides instead to make him team leader, agreeing to send him on the mission along with his choice of team members. Now, Maverick arrives at Penny's bar wearing his dress uniform to tell her that he'll be going on the mission, and the pair have a heartfelt goodbye. And this was kind of interesting because, of course, him and Penny, Penny played hard to get in the movie for a while. And, she finally got to the point where she just accepted that she was in love with Maverick again and that, she wanted Maverick to be able to help the pilots, but I don't think she thought it would result in him actually going on the mission. So, of course, now she's thinking, oh, holy crap, what if he goes and doesn't come home? Now, the finale. The first step in the finale is gathering the team. If you know Blake Snyder's beat sheet, it's gathering the team. So in the original film, Viper arrives at the graduation with immediate orders for Iceman, Slider, Hollywood, Wolfman, and Maverick. Viper tells Maverick that he'll receive his reel when he gets to the ship, and he tells him that if he doesn't, that he himself would be happy to fly with him. Now, in the sequel, we see the pilots on board the carrier headed to the mission site. Maverick chooses Payback and Fanboy along with Phoenix and Bob as his two Foxtrot teams, and he chooses Rooster, of course, as his wingman, which seems to surprise Rooster. But, I mean, we all knew that this is what the movie was coming to, him getting to a point where he could trust that Rooster could don't think, just do, right? You know, Rooster's a timid flyer, and he's been trying to get Rooster to come out of his shell the whole movie. And at this point, Maverick just has to trust that he's done enough to train Rooster to do what's needed to be done in this case, and that Rooster can defend himself, you know, out in the field. So the next step in the finale is storming the castle. In the original film, on board the carrier in the Indian Ocean, once again, the pilots are informed that a communication ship has become disabled and has wandered into foreign territory, that a rescue is on the way, and the pilot's job is to provide air support for that rescue. They are instructed that they have permission to fire on the enemy aircraft if threatened. Merlin is assigned to be Maverick's backseat, and Maverick is assigned to be Iceman's wingman, of course, to young Iceman's dismay. Moments later, on deck, the first group of pilots take off from the carrier and head towards the target. Now, in the sequel, the pilots are briefed yet again before heading out to their planes, where Rooster attempts to talk to Maverick, but Maverick tells him that they'll talk when they get back. And, you know, from there, the pilots take off, headed towards the target. Now, once the pilots are close enough to land and below radar, Maverick gives the carrier the signal to fire a series of missiles towards an enemy airfield, hoping to disable it, keeping any planes there from intercepting the pilots as they move towards the target. The missiles are successful in destroying the nearby airfield, but there happen to be a few scattered enemy planes already up and flying around on patrol, and once they get word of the missile attack, they scramble to protect the target. The pilots work as a team to get to the target before being intercepted by the bandits, ultimately successfully destroying it, against all odds, like we all knew they would, right? The pilots all make the climb over the tall side of the mountain, which was something that was kind of holding them back from successfully completing the mission when they were training, because of the G climb. And that's where the whole point of Maverick having experience flying at 10 Gs kind of comes back into the story, kind of like a Chekhov's gun type situation. But they fly up the tall side of the mountain and back up into the enemy's radar, which triggers the firing of missiles at the planes as they attempt to return to the carrier. Now, the high tower surprise is what's next. Now, in the original film, the high tower surprise is that the pilots arrive in foreign territories to discover that there aren't two MiGs like they were told there would be, but instead there are 5. Hollywood's plane is hit almost immediately, and Maverick has to take off from the carrier to relieve him. Maverick arrives to find Iceman being thoroughly harassed by the group of enemy planes, and that is the high tower surprise. In the sequel, the high tower surprise is Rooster, while the planes are trying to dodge all these missiles that are being fired from these missile nests that are all around the target that were designed to protect it. And so Rooster runs out of flares as the barrage of missiles continues, and this prompts Maverick to maneuver his plane into position to protect him. And that's when Maverick's plane is hit. I thought this was genius. Because it was kind of something that, you know, was unexpected when you first saw it, but then once it happened, you were like, okay, duh, yeah, this makes sense, to kind of flip it again to make it different than what happens in the original film, even though it's a similar beat. And, you know, we watch Cyclone order all the pilots back to the carrier as Maverick's plane falls out of the sky with its tail on fire. Now, to dig deep down. Now, Maverick is hesitant to join the fight at first, and this is in the original film. Even though he needs to save Iceman. So, and he's being implored to do so by his backseat, but after taking a moment to think about what Goose would want him to do, you know, the whole, talk to me, Goose, right? He re-engages and he shoots down an enemy plane. In the sequel, we watch Maverick come to in the snow-covered forest. He gets up just in time to evade an enemy helicopter that begins shooting at him, chasing him deeper into the woods. And as the chopper closes in and takes aim, the chopper explodes, and we see that Rooster has defied orders and come back to save Maverick. But just then, one last set of enemy missiles is fired at Rooster's plane, and he too is hit. Maverick, seeing his parachute, takes off running through the woods towards Rooster's position. Now, the next step, execute the new plan. As the battle rages on, in the original film that is, a MiG gets behind Maverick, Merlin tells Maverick that they have to disengage, but Maverick refuses to leave his wingman, who is Iceman. And this is kind of where the writers prove that Maverick has learned something from being at Top Gun. And so he's like, I'm not going to leave my wingman. So he's finally learned his lesson about selfish flying. So Iceman manages to shoot down the plane himself before being shot with gunfire from an enemy plane. And after a few tense minutes of dogfighting, Maverick manages to shoot down a second plane, which causes the remaining planes ultimately to retreat. Now, on the way back to the carrier, Maverick buzzes the tower, because of course he does, right? Causing the air traffic controller to spill his coffee. And before landing on the carrier and being met with lots of celebrating shipmen, the pilots hug before Iceman calls Maverick out. And he tells him, you are still dangerous, but you can be my wingman anytime. The pilots then continue to celebrate, and next we see Maverick alone on the lower deck of the carrier, deep in thought, before ultimately tossing Goose's dog tags into the ocean, symboling him finally being able to let Goose go. Now, in the sequel, Maverick and Rooster sneak onto the enemy base, the one that was fired upon earlier in the film, and they steal the one F-14 that the enemy has in storage, and they manage to take off, headed out back towards the carrier. But on the way out, they're intercepted by multiple enemy planes, fifth-generation fighters. And Maverick manages to shoot them all down, but another plane appears as they make their way out over the ocean, headed right for them. And in this situation, of course, Maverick is flying the plane and Rooster is in the back seat, just like his old man was in the original movie. So all the decisions that the writers made here, they just lined up really, really perfectly. But again, like I said, as they make their way out over the ocean, they find out that there's one last plane and it's headed right for them. So they pass each other at high speed, but the plane turns around and gives chase. And these planes, man, I've never seen nothing like it. I mean, I'm not an aviation expert, but these fifth generation enemy fighters, the way that they turn in midair, you just like, holy crap. So now, out of ammo, all seems lost as the enemy plane locks onto the F-14. And suddenly, right as it's about to fire, the plane is shot down and we see Hangman appear. And he leads Maverick and Rooster safely back to the carrier amid celebration from all the other pilots and the shipmen. Maverick then thanks Rooster for saving his life, and Rooster replies, it's what my dad would have done. The pair share a hug before Maverick looks to Cyclone and Warlock, who both salute him. And from there, we find Maverick back stateside at the military bar, where he finds out that Penny is not there and that she's taken her daughter, Amelia, on a sailing trip. Now, Maverick asks when she would be back, and the barkeep says, he asked if she said when she would be back, and the barkeep says, no, she did not. Which seems to make our hero a little sad, And lastly, we find Maverick in his hangar, right where he started at the beginning of the movie, working on his P-51. Again, shout out to the Red Tails. Then we see that Rooster is there with him. And suddenly, Amelia appears, to Maverick's surprise. Then he looks out and sees that Penny is also there. Now, that leads us to the final image. In the original film, the final image is a pair of F-14s flying off into the sunset, and we get the Righteous Brothers, the actual song, You've Lost That Loving Feeling. Now, in the sequel, the final image is Maverick and Penny flying together in the now completed P-15, reminiscent of the flight that Penny referenced earlier in the film that they took that got Maverick in some trouble when they were younger. So, my final thoughts are that, Top Gun Maverick is, I gotta say, it's the closest thing I've seen to a perfect movie in quite some time. Listen, I love this movie, and I could watch it 10 times a year and never, ever, ever get tired of it. That's just how good this movie was, both cinematically and narratively. And it just proves that filmmakers don't have to reinvent the wheel in order to make a good movie. It's proof that the old way still works, and it maybe is also proof that the old way is still the best way. And for those of you who have been subscribed to my channel for a while now, I'm not typically a fan of sequels and reboots. Outside of films that have been planned sequels because they're based on like a book series or something like that. And I'm certainly not a fan of a sequel coming 36 years after the original. That kind of idea sounds like an absolute disaster in the making. But Top Gun Maverick is an exception to that rule. And in fact, Top Gun Maverick might be the exception to that rule. Because I happen to think that this is one sequel film to follow behind an absolute classic original film that is actually better than that original film. But what do you guys think? Have you seen Top Gun Maverick yet? If you have, how did you feel about it? Did you think it was better than the original? Or do you think it was something missing? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you who might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themaskscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. I'll catch y'all on the next video.